Chapter 6. The higher magic, as has been shown, has as one of its objectives a communion both here and hereafter with the divine, a union not to be achieved by mere doctrine and sterile intellectual speculations, but by the exercise of other more spiritual faculties and powers in rites and ceremonies. By the divine, the theurgist recognized an eternal, spiritually dynamic principle and its refracted manifestation in beings whose consciousness, individually and severally, are of so lofty and sublime a degree of spirituality as actually to merit the term gods. This is obviously the objective view, and I shall speak of the gods in this chapter solely from this viewpoint, leaving the reader to interpret them otherwise if he so will. A caveat must be entered in this place, however. It must not be thought that the theurgists and divine philosophers were polytheists in any ordinary sense. Such a conclusion would indeed be very far from what is actually true, even for the Egyptians, who possessed a well-filled pantheon of hierarchies and celestial gods who are accused so frequently of being primitively and crudely polytheistic. E. A. Wallace Budge prefers a defense, for although the uneducated loved a plurality of gods, the priest and educated classes who could read and understand books adopted the idea of one God, the creator of all beings in heaven and on earth. For want of a better word, were called gods. This is much the position of the viewpoint employed in magic. Primarily, there is but one omnipresent life pervading the whole cosmos. It permeates and thrills in every corner and portion of space, sustaining the individual life of every being existing in any of the infinite worlds. Unknown in itself, since being omnipresent and boundless in every direction, and exalted beyond intellectual reach, it could never be comprehended by the human mind. But this much must be realized, that from it come forth all the gods, all human souls and spirits, and every conceivable thing that is. In some way incomprehensible to our finite understanding, the negative and passive energy, homogeneously scattered throughout space, became enlivened, forming itself into primeval active centers, which, with the passing of eons of time, expanded and gradually evolved into the cosmos. With these centers, the first manifestations there sprang from the latent homogeneity, a heterogeneous group of divine entities or cosmic intelligent forces who became the architects and builders of the universe. From their own individual spiritual essence, lesser hierarchies were born, and these in turn emanated or created from themselves yet other groups, until eventually the human souls came into being and reflected offspring of the blessed gods. These intelligent forces have been variously named gods, daemons, universal essences, Dhyan Chohans, eons, Teletarche, and many other names. They all imply the same fundamental idea of conscious, though not necessarily self-conscious, intellectual centers of force, wisdom, and intelligence, who emanate or create in one way or another from themselves the manifested finite universe. By the Egyptian theurgists, these cosmic forces or gods were very closely studied, and their attributes carefully observed and recorded in the form of parables, allegories, myths, and legends. Even in the conventional pictographs of their deities, each of the emblems had a high significance, which is at once profound in its implication, as it is simply eloquent in description of the characteristics of the god. For instance, a blue plume carried in the hand of one of the gods, or else surmounting the headdress, implied truth, steadfastness, and uprightness, whereas a scepter was intended to convey the idea that such a god carried with him supreme authority and sovereignty. Each separate symbol and sigil borne by the god on some parts of his person was a clue to his inherent nature. The myths and legends passed down to posterity by the Egyptian priests concerning the gods were not mere idle inventions by ignorant though imaginative men who, having nothing else better to do, occupied themselves in story-telling and in weaving pleasant and unpleasant fictions about the figments of their minds. On the contrary, so far from being puerile in each of these legends and pictorial descriptions of the gods, is concealed a wealth of transcendental knowledge for whomsoever has the ability to perceive it. With so astute a race of people as the Egyptians, a people who evolved a hardy civilization whose remains stand as noble memorials, even to this day, it could be hardly believed that their myths should be but interesting yarns, any more than the gods recognized by them were non-existent, or at least childlike fantasies. It should never be considered that the Egyptian pantheon, particularly the gods associated with the theurgic cults, were in any degree mythical in the sense that they were the result of the playful sporting of a fertile inventive faculty. Primitive man did not create the gods, as think so many modern students of comparative religion who are destitute of all sympathy and religious genius. What he really did, perhaps unconsciously, was to apply names, and even these names were significant, and quasi-human faculties to these powers or greater forces of nature, which were so accurately observed, and which he believed rightly enough to be manifestations or symbols of the divine. All the thoughts and ideas, all the great learning and knowledge of the Egyptians found their pictorial expression in allegory, parable, and paintings. Thus have we received them today. To dismiss their well-developed system of instructive legend and mythology as preposterous and childish is but indicative of a puerile and shallow intelligence. It can be demonstrated that only a little study is necessary to reveal a depth of insight which was never before realized to exist. In addition, the vignettes and painted symbols of the gods with which the Egyptians were wont to decorate their papyri, by the same token are not merely infantile drawings of vague intellectual opinions. Each god in the Egyptian myth had a precise, well-defined function to perform in the cosmos creative, preservative or destructive, as the case may be, and the function had been accurately ascertained by observation, both secular and theurgic, carried over a long period of time, and the qualities and nature of the god were expressed in pictures. That the Egyptians conceived Ra, the sun god, to exist actually in such a conventional art form as that in which they painted him, I am not to be construed as believing, nor that they considered the sun at midnight to assume the form of a beetle. What they actually did believe was that the symbol of the scarabæus expressed in various subtle ways the nature of the sun after the hour of setting. The cow, likewise, was a symbol of exuberant fertility, the ibis a symbol of wisdom and supreme intelligence, the hawk, by reason of its ability to remain poised in the empyrean, was a perfect symbol of the divine self, which, detached from all things of earth and form, looks down upon them with the eye of equanimity. The whole subject should be carefully studied, and in half as much care and attention, if half as much care and attention is given by the reader to the study of the gods as the average man devotes to his daily newspaper, a great deal of useful knowledge of profound importance in magic will be gained. The evolution and development of the cosmos, spiritual and physical, were first recorded by philosophers in geometrical changes of form. Every esoteric cosmogony used a circle, a point, a triangle, a cube, and so on. These later were incorporated into a simple geometrical form such as is called in the Kabbalah the Tree of Life. To each cosmic development a number was applied, and existing in as the specific meaning of the number or the particular phase of evolution was the activity of a god or a hierarchy of gods. Thus, in the Kabbalah, we have 10 primary emanations. To each of these is a number assigned, and in each number, therefore, is implied a god. There are 10 series of hierarchies of cosmic forces, spiritual, dynamic, and intelligent, whose concerted operations result in the formation of the physical universe. The tradition of the theurgists classifies them in a descending scale of purity and spirituality from the gods to archangels, intelligences, and spirits. Since in magic the object is to achieve in one way or another a close and abiding spiritual union with these cosmic deities, who are the underlying realities and the sources of sustenance and vitality, it is advisable to give a brief description of them as understood by the Egyptians. The table below will classify them according to their hierarchies and graduated scale, and the interpretation will be assisted if the reader remembers the statements made concerning the Sephiros in the previous chapter. Of each one of these gods I shall present a short description based on the Egyptological text, leaving the reader to interpret as he will. The nature of the archangels, intelligences, and spirits named on the table below will be revealed by the attributes of the ruling deity. Corresponding to the cosmic development represented among the Kabbalists by Keter, the crown, Ptah, the Egyptian deity, meaning whose name is the opener. For the Egyptologists, this seems to have been a stumbling block in their classifications. For in the event that he is assumed to be associated with the opening of the day by the sun, singularly enough, he never forms one of the important groups of the sun gods in the hieratic texts. In the Book of the Dead, his attributes bear not the slightest relationship to Ra, Khepra, or Tum, the gods connected with the rising, setting, and midnight obscuration of the sun. With the outline of the magical philosophy, however, it is not at all difficult to see in what sense Ptah is made the opener, because his appearance inaugurated or commenced a cycle of cosmic manifestation is he so named, and it is he who is the hidden Logos, the central metaphysical essence from which everything was given birth. So here we have the table, and we've got Kether. The god is Ptah Amun. Archangel Metatron, choir of angels, Cheos or HaKadosh. Number 2, Hokmah, Tahuti, Archangel Ratziel, choir of angels, Ophanim. Number 3, Bina, planet Saturn, god Isis, Archangel Tzafkiel, choir of angels, Arelim, intelligence of the planet, Agiel, spirit of the planet, Zaziel. Number 4, Hesed, Jupiter, God Ma'at, Archangel Tzadkiel, choir of angels. Chashmalim, intelligence of the planet IFL, spirit of the planet Hasmiel. Number 5, Gebura, planet Mars, God Horus, Archangel Kamael, choir of angels Seraphim, intelligence of the planet Graphiel, spirit of the planet Bart's Baal. Number 6, Tifereth, planet Sol, God Ra Osiris, Archangel Raphael, choir of angels Malachim, intelligence of the planet Nachiel, spirit of the planet Soras. Number 7, Netzach, planet Venus, God Hathor, Archangel Haniel, choir of angels Elohim, intelligence of the planet Hagiel, spirit of the planet Kadmiel. Number 8, Hod, planet Mercury, God Anubis, Archangel Michael, choir of angels Beni Elohim, intelligence of the planet Tiriel, spirit of the planet Tefathrath. Number 9, Yesod, planet Luna, God Shu Pasht, Archangel Gabriel, choir of angels Cherubim, intelligence of the planet Tarshishim Ve'ad Ruach Shechalim, and spirit of the planet Hasmodai. Number 10, Malkuth, planet God Seb, Archangel Zaziel, choir of angels Ishim. This interpretation would appear to gain confirmation by various illustrations in which he is shown fashioning the egg of the world upon the potter's wheel. Budge in confirmation also points out that the etymological root of Ptah is cognate with the meaning of another word meaning to carve or to chisel. This cognate root places the god excellently, as does the word artificer, appearing in the texts. For not only does Ptah open the evolutionary cycle, but it is he who, issuing from the thrice unknown darkness, is the great architect of the universe, giving together with Thoth and Isis birth to manifesting things. He was called the very great God who came into being in the earliest time, and to conclusively indicate his nature, he was also considered to be the father of the beginning and the creator of the eggs of the sun and moon. In the same category with Ptah, as a correspondence of the same series of philosophic ideas connected with the crown, is the god Amun or Amen. He was the invisible creative power which was the source of all life in heaven and earth and in the underworld. Eventually making himself manifest in Ra, the sun god, the name itself indicates that which is hidden or concealed, and in Ptolemaic times the name also became associated with a word meaning to abide and also to be permanent. In one of the sacerdotal documents, the god is hailed in such terms as provide us with a telling description of his real nature, the holy soul who came into being in the beginning, the first divine substance which gave birth unto the other two divine substances, the being through whom every other god hath existence. There is, in addition, a considerable amount of evidence leading one to believe that Osiris might be assigned to the same category. The British Museum brochure on the Book of the Dead makes the statement with regard to an Egyptian princess, that she was able to regard Amun-Ra and Osiris not as two different gods, but as two different aspects of the same god. She believed that the hidden creative power vested in Amen was but another form of the same power typified by Osiris. In all accuracy, however, Osiris must be regarded as the human incarnation of the creative power, the assumption in manhood of the Most High God, an avatara, if you will, of the Supreme Spirit. There is every reason to believe that this viewpoint of Osiris is the correct one, for he also stood for renewed birth and a spiritual resurrection, typifying the illuminated adept, purified by trial and suffering, one who died and after descending to the underworld miraculously rose again, glorified to reign eternally in the heavens. Insofar as this is the case, he will be considered as a type pertaining to Tifereth. There is nevertheless one aspect of him, Asa-un-Nefer Osiris, made beneficent or perfect, in which deific form he is a most apt representation of that phase of Keter which is most real and deepest aspect of selfhood. The nature of Thoth or Tahuti in the description of the characteristics which Egyptians ascribe to him leave not the slightest room for doubt as to his immediate allocation to Chokmah. He is wisdom and the god of wisdom, and as observed by Budge, he is the personification of the intelligence of the whole company of gods. The name Tahuti appears to be derived from the supposed oldest name of the ibis, which was a bird suggesting by its very posture, meditation, and consequently wisdom. There is an excellent description of the attributes of Thoth in Budge's The Gods of the Egyptians, as I cite as follows. In the first place, he was held to be both the heart and the tongue of Ra, that is to say, he was the reason and the mental powers of the god, and the means by which their will was translated into speech. From one aspect, he was speech itself, and in later times he may well have represented, as Dr. Birch said, the Logos of Plato. In every legend in which Thoth takes a prominent part, we see that it is he who speaks the word that results in the wishes of Ra being carried into effect, and it is evident that when he had once given the word of command, that command would not fail to be carried out by one means or another. He spoke the words which resulted in the creation of the heavens and the earth. His knowledge and powers of calculation measured out by the heavens, and planned the earth and everything which is in them. His will and power kept the forces in heaven and in earth in equilibrium. It was his skill in celestial mathematics which made proper use of the laws upon which the foundations and the maintenance of the universe rested. It was he who directed the motions of the heavenly bodies and their times and seasons. He was, in fine, the personification of the mind of God, or the Logos, and as the all-pervading and governing directing power of the heavens, he forms a feature of the Egyptian religion, which is as sublime as the belief in the resurrection of the dead in a spiritual body, and as the doctrine of everlasting life. Pallas Athena is the Greek goddess of wisdom, fabled to have sprung full-armed from the brain of the mighty father Zeus. Uranus, the god of the starry heavens, might also be placed in the same category with Thoth and Athena, for it must be mentioned that traditionally Chokmah is also the sphere of the fixed stars. Isis, corresponding to Bina, was regarded as the parent of the universe, first offspring of the ages, ruler of the sky and sea, and all the things on earth, and was the supernal mother whom the whole of the ancient world worshipped under many names. It was in connection with the Queen of Heaven as the compassionate and omnipotent mistress of both worlds that she drew to herself so great a crowd and devotees and sincere votaries. To briefly summarize, Budge concerning her, we may state that Isis was considered the great and beneficent mother whose influence and love pervaded all heaven and earth, and the abode of the dead she was. And the abode of the dead, she being the personification of the great passive reproductive power which conceived immaculately and brought forth every living creature and thing. What she brought forth, she protected, cared for, fed, and nourished. She employed her own life in using her power graciously and successfully, not only creating new things, but in restoring those that were dead. She was, besides all these things, the highest type of faithful and loving wife and mother. It was in this capacity that the Egyptians honoured and worshipped her most. According to the now familiar legend, Osiris, her husband, was slain through the cunning of his brother Typhon, or Set, emblematic of the destructive aspect of nature, and his body thrust into a box which, after being thrown into the Nile, was carried out to sea. After a long, wearisome search, Isis found it and set it as though in a safe hiding place, where it was found, however, by Typhon, who maliciously cut the corpse into a number of pieces. The incidents of her search for the mutilated body, and of the conception and birth of her child Horus, powerfully impressed the imaginations of the Egyptians, particularly so when the legend narrates her seeking help from Thoth, the god of wisdom and magic, and he, by his consummate skill in the theurgic arts, was able to tell her the process and words of power which temporarily restored Osiris to life and enabled him to beget upon her the god-child Horus. In addition to the above, there is the obscure legend relating to the helping part that Isis paradoxically extended to Typhon in the battle waged by Horus, who, so enraged by the seeming treachery of his mother, killed and decapitated her. Immediately, however, Thoth restored her head into that of a cow, which he attached to her body. In its own way, the legend indicates the relation which exists between Isis, the mother, and the cow goddess Hathor, many of the attributes of the latter appearing to coincide in a number of significant respects with those of Isis. The tree of life, adumbrating diagrammatically the process of evolution, should aid somewhat in the comprehension of the idea underlying this legend, as should the Greek legend attaching to Kronos, who is also a Bina attribution. In that legend, Kronos is described as depriving his father Uranos of the government of the world, and in turn was deprived by his own son Zeus. Blavatsky provides a suggestive explanation of this parable in The Secret Doctrine. Roughly, it implies that Kronos stands for endless duration, beginningless and endless beyond divided time and space. Those gods who were born to act in space and time, that is, to break through the circle of the spiritual realm into the terrestrial plane, are said allegorically to have rebelled against Kronos and fought the then one living high and highest god. In his turn, when Kronos represented as mutilating his father, the meaning of this mutilation is simple. Absolute time is made to become the finite and condition, a portion is rubbed from the whole, thus showing that Kronos, the father of the gods, has been transformed from eternal duration into a limited period of time. The same interpretation may also be attached to the decapitation of Isis, resulting in her transition as a supernal creative goddess to a lower terrestrial plane. Ma'at, the goddess attributed to the sphere of Hesed, is in the ancient Egyptian system closely allied with Thoth. So closely, in fact, that she may almost be regarded as his feminine counterpart. The type and symbol of this goddess is the ostrich feather, single or double, which is always fastened to a headdress or held in her hand. Primarily indicating that which is straight, the word ma'at was used in a physical and moral sense, so that eventually it came to mean right, true, upright, righteous. This goddess then embodies the ideas of physical and moral law, order, truth, and cosmic regularity. It may be noticed that many of these attributes of Ma'at are likewise significations assigned by astrologers to the planet Jupiter, which is one of the correspondences of the same Sephirah to which Ma'at is attributed. As a moral power, Ma'at was considered to be the greatest of the goddesses, and she came to be the lady of the judgment hall in the Duat, or the underworld, where the weighing of the heart took place in the presence of Osiris. Usually figured as a woman seated or standing, she holds in one hand the scepter of sovereignty, and in the other the ankh, the symbol of life. Some pictures show her to be provided with a pair of wings which are attached, one to each arm, and in some few cases she is portrayed bearing the plume of truth upon her head, upright without any headdress at all. The Roman Jupiter was originally an elemental deity and was worshipped as the god of rain, storm, thunder, and lightning. The Lord of Heaven and the Prince of Light, he was the god who foresaw the future, and the events he foresaw happened as a result of his will. Zeus is his Greek equivalent, and they both are assigned to Hesed. The translation of the fifth Sephirah, Gevurah, as might, together with its astrological correspondence to Mars, most appropriately sums up the characteristics of Horus. He is the Egyptian god of might, who has many forms, and most important of which are two, Hurpakrat and Herukuti. As the former, the Greek Harpocrates, he is represented wearing a lock of hair, the symbol of radiant youth, on the right side of his head. Sometimes, too, he wears the triple crown with plumes and discs upon his head as headdress, and occasionally the disc with plumes alone. In most cases, he is pictured with his forefinger raised to his lips in the sign of silence. As Herukuti, Horus of the two horizons, he is usually represented as a hawk wearing a solar disc encircled with Uraeus serpent, or with a triple or atef crown. With the sun god, he was closely connected and represented the solar disc in its daily course across the skies from sunrise to sunset. But it is as Horus, the offspring of Isis and Osiris, that he connects with Gevurah, in his aspect of the avenger of the murder and violation of his father. Figured as a hawk, he was able from the heights of heaven to see his father's enemies, whom he chased, so runs the legend, in the form of a great winged disc. With such wrath and vigour did he attack these enemies that they all lost their senses, and could neither see with their eyes nor hear with their ears. The statements concerning Horus made in the British Museum brochure are so interesting in this connection that they are given as follows. When Horus arrived at years of maturity, He set out to find Set and to wage war against his father's murderer. At length they met, and a fierce fight ensued, and though Set was defeated before, he was finally hurled to the ground. He succeeded in tearing out the right eye of Horus and keeping it. Even after this fight, Set was able to persecute Isis, and Horus was powerless to prevent it until Thoth made Set give him the right eye of Horus, which he had carried off. Thoth then brought the eye of Horus and replaced it in his face, and restored sight to it by spitting upon it. Horus then sought out the body of Osiris in order to raise it up to life, and when he found it, he untied the bandages so that Osiris might move his limbs and rise up, under the direction of Thoth. Horus recited a series of formulae as he presented offerings to Osiris. He embraced Osiris and so transferred to him his Ka, his own living personality and virility, and gave him his eye which Thoth had rescued from Set and had replaced in his face. As soon as Osiris had eaten the eye of Horus, he recovered thereby the complete use of all his mental faculties, which death had suspended. Straightway he rose up from his bier and became the lord of the dead and the king of the underworld. Mars and Ares are the Greek and Roman equivalents, being worshipped as the gods of war and battle, continuing the essential idea of Gevurah, strength, might, and energy. It is with Tifereth, that the gods associated with it, that I wish to deal with at somewhat greater length, inasmuch as they are those concerning more than any others the aspiration of the magician, since Tifereth is the sphere of beauty and harmony, as well as the house of the soul. The gods traditionally associated therewith are particularly symbolic and representative of the glorified soul of the holy guardian angel. Dionysus, Osiris, Mithra, and many others are all types of immortality, beauty, and equilibrium. Maurice Maeterlinck has rather splendidly summarized the whole philosophic position in this respect. Dionysus, he said, is Osiris, Krishna, Buddha. He is all the divine incarnations. He is the God who descends into, or rather manifests himself in man. He is death, temporary and illusory, and rebirth, actual and immortal. He is the temporary union with the divine that is but the prelude to the final union, the endless cycle of the eternal becoming. The deities typical of Tifereth hence represent the illuminated soul, exalted through suffering, perfected through trial, and rearisen in glory and triumph. Osiris may be assumed to be fairly representative of these rejuvenescent divinities, and there are evidences to the fact that from first to last Osiris was to the Egyptians the god-man who suffered and died and rose again, to be king of the spiritual realm. The Egyptians believed that they could inherit the eternal life as he had done, provided that what was done for him by the gods was done for them, this providing the rationale for the performance of the so-called dramatic ritual. They celebrated rituals in order that they might persuade Osiris and the gods who had brought about this resurrection. That is truth. The Lord of divine worlds, the scribe of the gods, Isis, who employed the magical words Thoth had given her, and Horus, the other gods who performed the rites which produced the resurrection of Osiris, to act on their behalf even as they had acted for the god. The worship of Mithra and Dionysus springs from the same underlying root. It connects too with the spiritual triumph of the God-man and the return of the Sun-God, as a symbol of the perfected soul has entered the human consciousness of man. And having enlightened the mind and redeemed the darkness of his life, makes light and joyous the imprisoned spirit. Krishna, likewise, is a symbol of the God-man, for in him spirit and matter were equilibrated, and in becoming an avatara, the earthly abode of the universal spirit, he resumed in one human personality the dual qualities of a god, immortal and ecstatic, together with all the characteristics typical of mankind. To Tifereth, the sun is also attributed, thus Ra including also Tum and Kepra, the setting and the midnight sun belonging to this series of gods. To the Egyptians, so holy was the conception of the sun, that to Ra they gave the attributions of divine light and life. He was the personifications of right, truth, goodness, and consequently the destroyer of darkness, night, wickedness, and evil. His relations with Osiris, who was part god and part man, and the cause and type of immortality for man, were at once those of a god father and an equal. It was in Ra that some of the noblest religious conceptions of the Egyptians concentrated, and from the solar god, the giver of sustenance and vitality, both physical and spiritual, to the dwellers of earth, he became identified with Amun, the hidden creative power, which had given rise to the whole manifested universe. The nature of Osiris is well shown in the legends that to men he taught the use of corn and the cultivation of the grape, and in this latter phase he is clearly identified with Dionysus Bacchus, the god of abounding vitality and ecstasy of the Greeks. In time, Osiris came to be regarded as the monarch of the dead and the guide of souls out of the darkness of earth into the blissful realm where, according to their theology, they would have full view of the divinity without restraint. The departed from his life, if the life had been well lived, is in a mystic manner identified with Osiris. In the life of the god he, too, was no insignificant part. Dionysus was worshipped in Greece as the power bringing forth leaves and blossoms and fruit in the trees. The vine with its clusters of grapes whence springs the wine gladdening the hearts of men was his greatest but by no means his only work. As the god of the tree and the vine, he is kindly and a gentle deity, ennobling man and his life, delighting in peace and plenty, bestowing wealth and exuberance upon his worshippers. Though in the legend, storm-beaten, torn, and tortured by his persecutors, though the thyrsus-bearing god flies from his persecuting enemies, he rises once again to new life and renewed activity. Under the name Iacchos, the brother or the bridegroom of Persephone, he had his part with her and Demeter in the rites of Eleusis. It may be interesting to point out in passing that Persephone is an attribution of the kingdom named in the Zohar the Virgin, the bride of the sun who is in Tifereth. It was this gracious, youthful Dionysus, the deity suffering and the transformed, at once evanescent and everlasting, dying and springing again to a new spiritual life, who was the chief divinity of the poets and mystics of the sect called Orphic, in whose mysteries the soul and its fortunes, when released from the body, became the prominent object. A similar god expressing the same idea of spiritual equilibrium and transformation, a god possessing almost identical characteristics as Dionysus was Mithra, the Persian god of light and light of the body and light of the soul. He identified the brilliant power of the sun, which unfailingly conquers the day after day and year after year the powers of darkness and its terrors. Mithra, commonly worshipped in a cave, which originally perhaps representing the recess under the earth wherein the sun at night was supposed to hide, came to signify to devout worshippers the abyss of incarnation into which the soul must descend. Then, like the god himself, they could arise, purified by many trials and sufferings, with glory and with exaltation. The goddess Hathor, together with Aphrodite and Demeter, are associated with the Sephirah Netzach, victory. In the earliest times in Egypt, Hathor was considered as a cosmic goddess, and she was believed to have been as the cow goddess, the personification of the generative power of nature, which was perpetually conceiving and creating, bringing forth and maintaining all things. She was the mother of her father and the daughter of her son, which at once recalls the traditional formula of the Tetragrammaton. There seems to have been little connection between her and Isis and Nuit, the queen and personification of space. We have already described the legend in which Horus killed Isis, whose head is transformed by Thoth into the head of a cow, the head of Hathor. This was suggested to imply the evolutionary transformation of the cosmic generative energies of Isis from above, the abyss, into a more mundane sphere of manifestation. There are various forms in which she is portrayed, the more frequent being that of a cow. Sometimes Hathor is represented as a woman wearing a pair of horns, within which she rests the solar discs. At others, with the vulture tiara in the front, which is the Uraeus serpent surmounted by 5 other uraei. On the back of her neck there is usually found a symbol signifying joy and pleasure, and on her back is also a kind of saddle cloth with a linear design, and the whole of her body is sometimes marked with crosses, which are probably indeed to represent stars, intended to represent stars rather. In the latter pictures she undoubtedly represents Nuit, from whose breasts the milk of the stars is said to flow. She represents as Hathor not only what was true, but what was good, and all that is best in a woman, as wife, mother, and daughter. She was also the patron goddess of all singers, dancers, and merrymakers of every kind, of beautiful women, and of love of artists and of artistic works. It is in this association that she compares with Aphrodite, the Lady of Love. As an equivalent of Demeter, she stands for the apparently inexhaustible fecundity, the generation of plants and animals succeeding each other on earth, and which to the earth return. It was undoubtedly as the fertile goddess of vegetation and agriculture that she was worshipped, particularly as the ancients considered growth and development as an act of love. Hermes and Anubis are correspondences to Hod, the glory. Hermes is an intellectual god and represents, in much lesser degree, the qualities of Thoth. Whereas the latter is a cosmic and transcendental deity, Hermes is a terrestrial god, described as having invented astrology, geometry, medicine, and botany, who organized government and established the worship of gods. He invented figures and the letters of the alphabet, and the arts of reading, writing, and oratory in all its branches. He was also employed to conduct the shades of the departed from the upper and lower world. He is associated in idea with Anubis and Anpu, the jackal-headed god of the Egyptians, there being also the Greek combination of these two names in Hermanubis. The head, which was the type and symbol of Anubis, was the jackal. This seems to prove, according to Budge, that in earliest times Anubis was merely the jackal god associated with the dead, simply because the jackal was generally seen prowling about tombs. But he may have additionally been conceived of as the dog-headed deity. The dog is a watcher and a guardian, in which function Anubis is portrayed in the Duat. By analogy, he represents the reason in man, which is also the guardian of the human consciousness, watching impressions and reactions to the exterior world. Tradition declares that of Anubis that he was the god who embalmed the body of Osiris, and that he swathed it in the linen swathings made by Isis. From various other passages in the Book of the Dead, it is clear that Anubis was a great god in the underworld, and his rank and importance seems to have been as great as that of Osiris. In the judgment scene in the Duat, Anubis the Watcher appears to act for Osiris, with whom he is intimately connected, for it is he whose duty it is to examine the tongue of the great balance, and to take care of the beam is exactly horizontal. The goddess Bast or Pasht, who is the deity correspondence of Yesod, the foundation, is usually represented in the form of a woman with the head of a cat. She also has at times the head of a lioness surmounted by a snake, holding in her right hand a sistrum, and in her left hand an aegis surmounted by either the head of a cat or a lioness. She was a personification of the moon, especially as Kenzu, her son, who was also a lunar god. With the head of a lioness, which is usually painted green, she symbolized the sunlight. But when cat-headed, her connection with the moon is undoubted. Associated with the sphere of the foundation as expressing the dual aspect of the astral light was not only Bast but Shu. Change and stability are the two paradoxical characteristics of that light. Bast expressing the lunar aspect of change and perpetual flux, and the idea of stability and a firm foundation to things is expressed in the form of Shu. Sometimes he is seen grasping a scorpion, a serpent, or a hawk-headed scepter, and he was worshipped as the god of the space which existed between earth and sky. It was he who held up the sky with his hands, one supporting it at the place of sunrise and the other at the place of sunset. He has been identified with the vital principle of things, which is in accord with the implicit theory of the astral light, which is the direct vehicle of the 5 pranas or vital currents. In his capacity of sky-bearer, there is an interesting myth. When the great god Ra ruled over the gods and men, mankind on earth began to utter seditious words against him, causing him to determine to destroy them. Summoning various gods to conference at the suggestion of Nuit, he commissioned Hathor to effect the worldwide destruction of men. Soon after this, he wearied the earth itself, and Nuit, having assumed the form of a cow, Ra seated himself on her back. Before long the cow began to shake and tremble because of the elevation above the earth. So Shu was commanded to support her and hold her up in the sky. When Shu had taken his place beneath the cow and was bearing up her body, the heavens above and the earth beneath came into being, and the 4 legs of the cow became the 4 props of heaven at the 4 cardinal points. Thus came the god Seb into separate existence. Seb was the god of the earth, and the earth formed in his body, and he was called the house of Seb, just as the air was called the house of Shu, and the heavens the house of Ra. Seb was the god of the earth, and the earth formed his body, and was called the house of Seb, just as the air was called the house of Shu, and the heavens the house of Ra. He represented as a man bearing the Atef crown, and sometimes the form of a goose is added thereto, corresponding to Malkuth, the kingdom. Seb represents the fertility of the surface of the earth, and in the mythology of the underworld, he played a prominent part, retaining those of the departed who were unable to pass into Duat, the Greek goddess of the earth. Similar to the Egyptian Seb was Persephone, known among the Romans under the name of Proserpine. The story of her rape by Hades and her enforced imprisonment under the earth is well too known to require mention here. Some interpreters refer to it as the disappearance of the body and the subsequent rebirth of the soul, while others see in Proserpine a simple myth of the vegetation cult, the goddess being the seed corn, which remains concealed in the ground part of the year. When she returns to her mother Demeter, it is like the corn rising from the earth, and the nourishment and food of man and beasts. Though this must conclude the examination of the gods so far as the subject may be gone into here, it cannot be too frequently iterated that this highly complex subject should be well studied in its various aspects and philosophical connections before the practical work of invocation is undertaken. Before there can be any degree of real success in invocation, and in firmly establishing a union and fellowship with the gods, the theurgist should be well acquainted, at least in theory, with the nature of the gods, what principles or functions they fulfill, and in the natural and universal economy, and what they really are. All the legends of myth of the ancient peoples, in association with the gods, disclose a valuable account of their true nature. If but a little discrimination be employed, with an understanding of the fundamentals which form the basis of the Kabbalah, the theurgist should endeavour to understand, as far as is possible, why the forms of animals are adopted as masks of the gods, and there being many interpretations of this. A synthesis should be made from those which seem the most probable and the most sensible, and I might add as a suggestion that a study of the painted representations of the gods will be well repaid. The interested student could do no less than visit the Egyptian galleries of the British or other museum, and thoroughly acquaint himself with the conventional art forms by which the gods are represented.